Yeah, there's sheets up front.
Level check for the monitor, level check for the monitor. Microphone set up for Amanda, which is why it's upstairs. I'm married up. Not a joke. Level check. Now, for the people in the room, because we got bodies soaking things up, Cheddar, do we sound okay? We're good?
Yeah.
Okay. Folks in the back corner over there, can you hear okay? See you. There's a couple up front. Let's go ahead and take those. We'll fill it over here.
She's right. New York. New York. That's what I was going to say. Oh, not north. Okay. I don't think about price farther past all. But I love the city. They're nice in the city. You gotta have the seats here. I said she's an extra one over here. No, I
A whole bunch of people won't be scared. A lot of people are just scared.
Smell a little weird.
Seats up here, seats up here, seats up here. Except for Andy, he has to go somewhere else.
Yes, it's on the floor.
Okay.
I think we're good.
It's true.
No. Okay, we got one down.
I really am there.
Or there.
We're going to get this on the live stream. Just bear with us. We're running a little behind.
In the spirit of the event, could everybody make a really scary face? Okay, y'all are terrifying.
We're scared.
All right, welcome to Late Night at the Georgia Mountain Storytelling Festival. Or really, what passes for late night? Georgia Mountain Storytelling Festival.
We're old.
We're old. This session is presented with wonderful thanks to the National Endowment for the Arts and the Georgia Council for the Arts. My name is Amanda Lawrence, and I am your ghost host for the evening. I'm also one of your storytellers. I live just up the road in Blairsville. And I am joined tonight by two fantastic storytellers, Judy Baker, who could be Judy is from Cleveland, Tennessee. She is one of those fantastic storytellers who can do everything. So tonight she is going to give you chills and thrills, and tomorrow morning she's teaching a workshop on storytelling and AI, which may be scary to some of you, but you'll be in really good hands. Our other storyteller tonight is Jessica Robinson, who drove all the way from Fairfax, Virginia, just to scare you. That's commitment. Jessica runs the Women's Storytelling Festival, which is a wonderful event. I should say Judy runs the Ocoee Story Fest, another wonderful event. I know Jessica is going to be frighteningly good because I met her in a ghost stories class taught by Lynn Ford, and I have heard how creepy she can get. Now, let's take a minute and get in the mood. So everybody close your eyes. Close your eyes. And imagine you're sitting by a campfire. The sun is sinking behind the hills. You can feel a chill in the spring air. Burrow down in your coat and lean toward the warmth of the fire. The world is so still, you can hear the crackle of every flame. Orange embers rise up and merge with the stars. Wisps of smoke drift off to the beyond. Gather round the flickering flames where shadows dance but have no names. In the heart of the mountains, whispers wail as we begin our ghostly tale. Please welcome Judy Baker.
I always follow the tall people. I like to tell to the littles because they're all smaller than me. Has anybody seen the ghost of old skinned Tom? Long white bones with the skin all gone. Poor old Tom. Wouldn't it get chilly with no skin on? Thomas Rhett Thompson was a rounder, a scallywag. He was a cad. The consummate ladies' man, his travels left a trail of broken hearts and shattered dreams from Atlanta to Chattanooga. He was a wonderful salesman. He was as comfortable talking to a farmer out in his field about his soybean yield as he would talking to a whole room of Rotarians. He was so successful that they had even expanded his territory. Tom rolled into North Georgia town early one afternoon. His fine car slid to a park right in front of the hotel. He went in and signed the register with a flourish, Thomas Rhett Thompson. And then he went out on the porch to survey his kingdom that would be so for the next 24 hours or so, looking for a possible evening companion, because Tom was seldom seen without a beautiful young lady by his side. But minutes became hours, and perhaps tonight would be the one time in history that Thomas Rhett Thompson would not have a young lady to dine with him that night until right across the street, coming out of the Rexall drugstore, was Essie Mae Goforth. Stepping out into the bright afternoon sunshine, she tossed her head, and that golden hair caught the sunlight, and it glittered. The bright yellow sundress was filled out in all the right places. Tom crossed the street, introductions were made, and he gallantly offered to carry her parcels for her all the way home. That is, if there was nobody there waiting for her. "Oh no, my husband Joe is out of town and won't be back until tomorrow." Later that evening, in the darkness that had dropped down over that little town, a car pulled into Essie Mae's driveway. And Joe got out. He had come home a whole day early. He was excited because he wanted to come in and surprise Essie Mae because she wasn't expecting him until the next day. And he was surprised. The house was dark. No sign of a light, no sign of anything going on. But maybe Essie had just gone to bed early. Maybe she was just tired. He opened the door and what was that? That scent that he caught, that was the perfume he had bought Essie for their anniversary. A scent that she had promised to wear for no one but him. And mingled with that flowery scent was a hint of a gentleman's cologne, a cologne that he never wore himself. And the couch there with the cushions that always stood up straight just like sentinels was rumpled. And the pillows were thrown in the floor. And there on the low table in front of the couch, 2 wine glasses still glistening with the red droplets in the bottom. Enraged, Joe went to the kitchen, pulled open the cutlery drawer, pulled out the biggest butcher knife that he could find. Got in his car, and he wasn't sure where Essie maybe had gone, but he remembered. There was a secluded little spot up on the side of the hill overlooking the old cemetery that overlooked town, and he had gone there several times with Essie Mae when they were courting, and maybe wanted to slip away for a little while. And sure enough, parked under a tree, just in the shadows, was a strange car. And in that strange car were 2 heads much too close together. Joe came up to the car, wrenched the door open, and there was Essie Mae and Thomas Rhett Thompson. He grabbed Tom and pulled him from the car, and with that butcher knife plunged it into his chest, stabbing him right in the heart and killing him instantly. Screaming, Essie Mae bailed out of the other side of the car and ran screaming into the woods, never to be seen again. But just because Joe had killed Tom, he wasn't satisfied. His anger burned within him, and he took that butcher knife and he began to skin him until long ribbons of that skin just fell in a pile next to Tom's lifeless body. And then, coming to his senses, realizing with horror what he had done, Joe dropped the butcher knife, got in his car, and went back into town to turn himself in. When the deputies arrived at the crime scene, all they found was the pile of discarded skin. There was no body there, just the skin. In the months and the years that followed, young couples who wanted to drive up into that so-called lover's lane for a few minutes of peace, a few minutes of serenity, a few minutes of aloneness together, would be frightened by the figure of a man that would come and, are you with who you're supposed to be with? Are you with who you're supposed to be with? So tonight, when you leave make sure you leave with the one that brung you. Has anybody seen the ghost of old skinned Tom? Long white bones with the skin all gone. Poor old Tom. Wouldn't it get chilly with no skin on?
I don't know about you all, but I'm chilly. So I'm from New Jersey, and normally that gets applause, all right. And growing up in New Jersey, I grew up on the border of the Pine Barrens, and that's easy to do when you grow up in New Jersey, because if you don't know, the Pine Barrens are 1.1 million acres, so they're huge. And you might have heard of the Pine Barrens, if you're not from New Jersey, from watching mafia movies and The Sopranos and other things like that, because that is where they always take the bodies to bury. Or they take the people to turn them into the bodies to bury. Pine Barrens is a great place to do murder and to lose the evidence. And if you haven't heard of the Pine Barrens because of that, then maybe you have heard of the Pine Barrens' most famous resident. Did you guys know that New Jersey is the only state in the US of A with its very own state demon? The Jersey Devil, who makes his home in the Pine Barrens. Now, growing up near the Pine Barrens, that was our nature. That's where we would go for our nature hikes and our canoeing. And this one time in high school, a group of us in a club together, we went on a camping trip, an overnight camping trip to the Pine Barrens, organized by the school. And when we showed up, everything was ready for us, because you know, when you're in high school, they do stuff for you. So the tents were set up, the fire was set up, our food was there, and there was Gary. He was just the guy, you know, the old guy who was working there. I was 45 or 50. And we ate our meals, and then the sun went down and it got dark, and that was time for the hayride through the Pine Barrens. And as Gary drove us around the dark woods, he told us the story of the Jersey Devil. Back in 1735, Old Mother Leeds gave birth to the devil. And there's two versions of the story. One is that, well, the devil was her 13th child. 13 being the number of the beast, that child was of the devil. The other version of the story is that Old Mother Leeds, having already had 12 babies, well, when she was about to give birth to that 13th child, she cursed that baby to the devil. Either way, when the baby was born, it came out covered in red scales. It had a long, pointy tail, 2 horns, and wings like a bat. And it shot off into the woods, where it would maybe never be seen again if it didn't have a hunger. Soon after that devil was born, there were animal carcasses found in the woods. And not long after, there were human carcasses, some found and some never seen again. That was in 1735, but the bodies, the murders, the slaughter continues to this day because the devil lives still. We were high school students, we weren't scared. Although it was nice to get back to the campfire, which is bright and warm. And then we were excited for the teachers to go to bed in their own campsite and leave us alone because we were teenagers and we wanted to get to the fun stuff. So we all sat around the fire and the teachers went off to bed, but there was Gary, just sitting with us, not leaving us alone. And everyone was just kind of quiet, and it got a little bit boring, and finally one of the kids, I guess out of boredom, just said, so, Gary, do you believe all that stuff you told us about the devil? And Gary kind of locked eyes with the kid, and then he looked each one of us in the eyes, and he said, I don't know if I believe in a devil, but something evil was born in those woods that day. Something evil came to the Pine Barrens. And those of us who grew up here, who know the history, those of us whose family go back generations, we know that evil lives in these woods still. And some people think that evil got into the ground and got into the blood of the people born and raised here, people like me, so that sometimes people might not know the difference between wrong and right. Sometimes people might not think it's such a bad idea to murder a man or a woman, or someone like me might not think it's that bad, might even enjoy the idea of sneaking into a campsite filled with kids and slaughtering each of them as they oh! You should have seen your faces. And with that, Gary got up and he walked off, disappearing into the dark, dark woods. None of us thought he was very funny. Although I gotta be honest, I don't think any of us slept that night. But on the upside, none of us got murdered either.
Sorry. Problems of the top. I can tell you one that is told in a lot of places, but I first came across it in East Tennessee. She had come into Harmon Moody's store the same time every night for a week, closing time, just as he was sweeping up the remains of the day. She was young, not more than 20, and tall but gaunt, and a little gray, in that way of people who've been through illness or done without food for a time. And she'd do the same thing every night. Place an old tin cup on the counter, say just one word: milk. Then Harmon would fill the cup, she'd leave a coin, and drift on out the door, never even having looked him in the eye. Who she was a mystery. And that was saying something. Harmon ran the only general store for miles around, so he knew every family in the area, but he couldn't place her or her people. The coins were a mystery too, all of them old, 50, 100 years or more, and covered in earth. He wouldn't put them in the till, he'd taken to keeping them in a little box on the counter for further study. But the mystery that most interested Harmon, and the one that was hotly debated around the supper table every night at his house, was not who she was or where the coins came from, but what she wanted the milk for. Harmon's young son Johnny was certain he knew. He'd say, "I know what it is, Daddy. It's kittens. You remember when that mama cat died and we had to feed the babies? I think she's feeding kittens." And Harmon's wife, Mayella, would say, "No, honey, I don't think so. Harmon, you said she looks like she's been doing without food, and I'm hard-pressed to think of anybody who would do that for a litter of kittens. I think it's a baby." And Harmon would say, "Mayella, we have been round and round about this. We can't think of any family in the area that's been expecting." I know. Unless she's one of the mountain folk. You know they don't come down to town too often." Round and round they'd go. Well, finally, Harmon couldn't take it anymore. He had to know. So the next night, when the girl left the store, he followed her, but quietly, at a distance. She drifted on down the dirt road toward town, holding that old tin cup with the utmost care. The road was rocky, rutted. She didn't seem to notice, even though, as Harmon noticed in the moonlight, she was barefoot. Then shortly before town, she took off into the woods. And that's where Harmon almost lost her. She must have been following some kind of path, but he couldn't see it, kept stumbling in the underbrush. And then finally, just when he had begun to wonder where on earth they were going, they reached the other side of the woods. And when he saw the field that opened up out in front of them, he knew. Gunning's cemetery. He thought suddenly of those horns covered in earth. They must have been taken from the eyes of the dead. She went on into the cemetery, and that's where Harmon hesitated. Now, he believed in the resurrection of the soul just as much as the next church-going man. And he knew that all that was out there was people's earthly remains, just the shells that had housed who they had once been. But still, he made it a practice never to go to such places, for fear of running into somebody who hadn't yet made it either up or down. And so it was with no small degree of trepidation that he followed her. She passed on through the first part of the cemetery where the people who had a lot of money were laid to rest in mausoleums. Then she went on through the center section where the people who had a little money but not a lot were laid to rest with headstones. She kept going all the way to the far back corner where the people who could afford neither mausoleums nor headstones were buried in unmarked graves. That was where the mountain folk laid their kin. Then as Harmon watched, she stepped up onto a grave that looked fairly freshly dug and disappeared. Harmon fell back against a tree, his heart about to pound out of his chest. And then he heard something that made his heart stop altogether. The high, thin wail of an infant coming from that grave. Harmon staggered to his feet. He ran back out of the cemetery, back through the woods, back up the dirt road. He jumped in his wagon. He raced home, and he started hollering as soon as he hit the yard. Mayella, Mayella, get the lantern. I'll get the shovels. Come quick, woman, come quick. She came running out. Harmon, what's going on? There's no time to lose, woman. I'll tell you on the way. They stopped in town only briefly to collect the sheriff, lest they be thought grave robbers. And then the three of them entered the cemetery, filled with equal measures of purpose and fear. When they reached the far back corner, Harmon thought for a moment he must have been mistaken, because there were no footprints on that grave. But then they all heard it. The baby's cry, but weaker this time, almost a breathy mewling. Mayella said, "Good Lord in heaven." And they all began to dig. They got down to the coffin. It was pine, cheaply made. When they pried the lid off, Harmon's heart stopped for the second time that night. It was the girl from the store, plainly dead, and had been for some days by the looks of her. She was curled on her side, her arms wrapped around the crying baby in a pink blanket. An old tin cup lay next to them. The sheriff was the first to recollect himself. He said it could have been a coffin birth. Rare, but it does happen. There's one in the county records from 20 years back. And then Harmon, who was equally eager for an explanation, said, or you know, my granny told me one time about this mother and baby, and they both took real sick, and the mother died, and everybody thought the baby died too, but he didn't. He was just sleeping real deep. Mayella said, "Harmon, it don't much matter how it happened. We got to save that baby." The sheriff reached into the coffin to extract the child, but the mother's arms tightened, preventing him. Then the men began to talk of perhaps needing to break an arm or some other such expedient. But Mayella said, wait. She knelt by the coffin, reached in, brushed the mother's hair back from her face, and spoke gently. It's plain to see how much you love your daughter. You've wrestled down death just to feed her. I would have done the same. I'm a mother too. I have a son at home, and Harmon and I, we had a daughter, but we lost our baby girl to the fever last spring. I would have moved heaven and earth to save her, just like you did. Now you've done all you can, and it's time to take your rest and let your child come into the world of the living. She looked up at Harmon for a long moment. He nodded. With your permission, we'll take her in. Bring her up. I'll love her as my own. And I promise you, she'll never want for anything. With that, the mother's arms opened. Mayella lifted the child from the coffin. They never did learn the mother's name or her daughter's. But Mayella named the baby Dorothea, which means gift of God. And she made sure her daughter always knew that a mother's love is stronger than the grave.
Jack lived up on the mountain with his mama. They had a right good little life up there and pretty self-sufficient, but there are some things that you can't grow on a farm. Darning needles and thread being two of those things. And Jack, being a boy, was exceptionally hard on his clothes, and Mama had sewed and patched until she broke her one last needle. And she was running low on thread, so she said, Jack, I need you to run down to town and go in at the store. I need a pack of needles and I need some more thread. Tell the storekeeper to put it on our bill and I'll come down the end of the month like always. Well, Jack liked going down to town all by himself. It meant that Mom thought he was responsible. And as he began to skip out of the yard to go on down toward town, Mama said, now make sure you're back before dark. It's a long, winding trail back up the mountain, and it's awful easy to get lost. I will, Mama. I'll be fine, Jack said. Well, he went down to town skipping and looking at all the sights around. Oh, it was a beautiful day, and Jack was happy just to be out on his own. He went into the store, did exactly like Mama said, which is a good thing for all of us to ever do, is just do what Mama says. He got her thread and her needles, and the shopkeeper put it in a little paper poke, and Jack stuck it inside his jacket and thought, it's too pretty a day to go straight home, and if I go straight home, Mama's sure to find something for me to do. But so he just thought he'd take a little walk. And as he was walking through town, he spied, oh, she was pretty. Oh, prettiest girl he'd ever seen. And she was sitting on the front porch of the parsonage. And Jack remembered, well, I heard there's a new preacher in town, and that must be his daughter. Why, it would be the neighborly thing for me to go over there and welcome her into the community. And that's what he did. He walked up on the porch, sat down next to her, and said, "Hi, my name's Jack." And she said, "Well, hi, my name's Priscilla." And they seemed to be about the same age, and they began to talk and found common things to talk about, school and people and just things that young kids would talk about. And her mama came out and brought some cookies and some lemonade and joined them, and oh, they had a fine time. A fine time. Until her mama said, "Well, Priscilla, it's getting towards supper time, and you're going to have to come in the house now. We got work to do." And Jack noticed the shadows getting long under the trees there in the front yard. And you remember what Mama said, get back up the mountain before dark. Well, he said a hasty goodbye, said, "I'll see you sometime later," and started off at a fast trot. Well, it looks like the darkness was going to be faster than he was even at a fast trot, and he started up that mountain trail, and it not only was getting dark, the sun was not only going down, but he saw big thunder clouds just boiling up, coming down from the other side of the mountain. And he knowed it was going to get dark and it was going to get wet. But he started back up that trail that he had come down just happily a few hours before, and it was getting darker, and the thunder started rolling in, and big fat raindrops began to drop, drop, drop on his head. And the trail began to get wet and began to get slick, and in his haste, in his hurry, Jack slipped and he fell. And that little poke with the thread and the needles jumped out of his jacket and rolled down beside the trail. And Jack knows he needed to get home with that, because getting home late would be bad enough, but not bringing in what Mama said for him to get would be worse. So he scrabbled down, trying to find that little poke, and it was further off the trail than he realized, and he did find it, and he stuck it back up in his jacket, but when he looked around, the trail was gone. The trees really weren't the happy, familiar ones that he had seen earlier that afternoon. And he scrambled through the brush and the bushes and the thickets and was trying to find the trail again, and he spied it. Just a little shack, just a little wooden shack just right over there, and the lightning was a-flashing, and the thunder was a-rolling, and the rain was starting to come down in sheets, and Jack was getting wet, and he knew that shanty, that little shack, would be the best protection that he could find. He'd just have to wait until the storm left before he could make his way home. When he got into that little shack, the door was unlocked, thankfully, and it was at least dry. There were cobwebs. It hadn't been used in a long, long time. And there was an old fireplace over here against one wall, and thankfully there was some kindling and a couple of pieces of wood in there. And Jack felt around upon the mantel, and sure enough, there was a couple of matches left. Well, they were a little bit damp from the humidity and from the rain, and it took several tries, but he finally got him a little fire started, and the room began to look a little more cheerful, and Jack began to feel a little bit better with that little bit of light and that little bit of warmth. And he was sitting there and getting warm, and he began to nod off, and the rain was coming down, and the thunder, and closed his eyes. I'll just rest just for a minute here, and boom! Down that chimney came the biggest, blackest cat he'd ever seen. And it sat in that fire, and it stood up, and it shook the embers off, and looked at Jack with great big green eyes and said, "Wait till Emmett comes." And then it walked over to a corner and sat there and looked at Jack. And Jack thought to himself, if you'll just stay over there a little while longer, I'll stay over here out of your way, and we'll be fine. Well, Jack began to notice the rain was actually starting to maybe slack off a little bit. Slack off maybe a little bit more. Well, that cat seemed like he was content to stay over in that corner, and And Jack was content to sit right there by the fire just a little while longer, and he couldn't help it. He was tired. He was so tired from coming up the mountain, and he was just getting so comfortable. And that cat over there began to purr, and the purring of that cat began to lull Jack, and he closed his eyes one more time, and boom! Down that chimney came an even bigger, blacker cat. It was the blackest cat he'd ever seen, and it shook the embers off, and it walked out into the room, and it looked at Jack and said, "Wait till it comes." And Jack watched that cat get over in the other corner, and cat 1 was over here, cat 2 was over there, and Jack was hoping nothing else was going to happen because he didn't have no way to protect himself against even them wild cats if they decided to come after him. Well, the rain was indeed slacking off. And Jack was sitting there, and the fire was starting to just kind of die down just a little bit, just embers left there. And you could count the raindrops as they hit that little tin roof. 1, 2, 3, 4. And boom! Down that chimney came it had to be as big as a horse. It could barely get down that chimney, and when it squatted on those embers, it put the fire completely out. That cat was black as night, and he looked at Jack with great big yellow eyes. He said, "Wait till Emmett comes." Jack jumped up and said, "Well, when Emmett comes, you tell him I have done been here and I have done left."
Scares them away. John lived in a small house on the outskirts of town. Some called it the bad side of town. He'd lived there all his life, inheriting the house when his parents had died. He always thought he'd get out, but he lived there still with his wife of 30 years, Clara, and their grown son, William, who everyone just called Billy. Billy had never gotten out either, had never made anything of himself, although if John was being honest, he'd never made anything of himself either. Although things were looking better now that the new facility had opened up just down the road. When they were announcing applications for the facility, John was the first one lined up to put his application in because the facility paid a lot better than the factory where him and Billy worked. He tried to get Billy to put his application in as well, but Billy objected on moral grounds. Can you imagine passing up a raise on moral grounds? But John put his application in and he got that job, and now he was working at the facility making better money than ever before. And the work was pretty easy, if a little boring. He worked in receivables. He would receive the deliveries of people arriving almost daily. And when they'd get there, he'd meet them and he'd take them to the holding cell, and then while they were getting processed by the doctors, he would go through their things and process their stuff. If there was anything valuable, he was supposed to pass it up to the bosses, but well, these people, they never had anything valuable. It was mostly just crap and their papers. Got sent to another department. John didn't really know what happened to that after. He didn't really care that much. And then at night, when he'd come home, he'd sit at the dinner table and he'd tell Clara about his day. Sometimes Billy was there if he didn't have a shift at the factory. And this night, things were looking up because John had found something he thought might be valuable, at the very least interesting. And he threw that thing on the table. Billy shook his head, but Clara gasped. And it was horrific looking. When John had first seen it, he had thought it was like the arm of one of those old-timey dolls. But then when he got closer, it looked more like a animal's paw or a child's hand. It was all shriveled and hardened like it had been preserved. He'd first seen it in the hands of an old man who was clutching it to his chest, and when he tried to take it from the old man was gonna fight him. He didn't want to beat him in front of the other people. He didn't want to start his day off that way, so he tried arguing instead. But of course, he didn't speak the language. These people never do. So he argued at him louder, but he refused to understand. And he wasn't sure if he was going to have to get violent, but there was a young man, and he spoke the language, so he offered to translate. The old man said that the thing he was holding on to was a magic relic. And John said, "Really?" Because he didn't believe in that kind of stuff, but somewhere in the back of his mind, he had the thought that, well, these people came from strange places, strange customs, maybe there was some magic left in it. So he said, "Well, what does it do?" And with the young man translating, the old man explained that it granted 3 wishes to whoever held it. Well, is that why you don't want to let it go? You're trying to wish yourself out of here? No. The wishes you wish for are not what you get. I'm holding it because I don't want it to hurt anyone else. I want to make sure it gets destroyed. Well, how does that work? Granting wishes somehow hurting people, but, well, there was some back and forth with John and the old man and the young man translating, and eventually John got the thing off of him, promising to destroy it, promising he would throw it on the fire the first chance he got. Now he had thrown it on the table. Billy, after hearing the story, stood up and said, I hate that you work there, Dad. I hate the way you treat those people. I'm going to bed. I got an early shift in the morning. And he took himself off to sleep. And John looked at Clara. We should destroy it. It looks evil. I don't like it. You should throw it on the fire like you said you would. Well, John explained to his wife that if it didn't work, if there was no magic, there was no harm in wishing on it. But imagine if it did. Imagine if they had 6 wishes between them. They could be rich. They could be living on an island this time next week. Well, there was some back and forth between John and his wife, but eventually she agreed she was a good wife after all. And not only did she agree to make the wishes, she agreed to make them first. Because somewhere in the back of John's head, he had this thought that since he had been the one to take it from the old man, since he was a man, that if there were some kind of evil in that thing, that maybe it would go a little easier on his wife. So neither of them knowing how to use it, Clara stood up and she clutched it to her heart and she spoke the words that they agreed she would say. I wish for $100,000. She looked around for a miracle. there was nothing. There was no puff of smoke, there was no glaring light, there was no gold showering from the ceiling, there was nothing. And after some long moments, John got up and he went over and he checked their bank account, but there had been no big deposit. So John went over and he took that thing from his wife and he put it on top of the mantle and he doused the fire. And they took themselves off to sleep. John, disappointed. Clara, relieved. In the morning, a little after 10 a.m., there came a sound at the front door. Well, Clara went to open it, John close behind, because it was unusual for people to knock on their door these days. And when Clara opened the door, there were two people there. There was a man in a suit and a police officer. Clara invited them into her home, and the police officer explained that there had been an accident at the factory and that Billy had been killed, and that one or both of them would have to come down to the station to ID the body. And as Clara sobbed into John's chest, the man in the suit explained that Billy, like everyone who works at the factory, had signed the papers, the waivers, releasing the factory from any liability, but in condolence and in sincere regret over the loss of their son, the factory would provide a one-time only payout of $100,000. John had to sign some papers, and then the man handed him a check, which he put in his back pocket. And as Clara lay down to cry, John followed that police officer down to the station. And as he waited to ID the body of his only child, he was devastated. But somewhere in the back of his mind, as that check burned a hole in his pocket, he did have the thought, it worked. And they had 5 wishes left. Well, the next 2 days passed quickly with people coming and going and bringing food and the funeral arrangements being made. And then the night before the funeral, John and Clara found themselves alone in their home. John just warming himself by the fire, Clara cleaning furiously. She needed the distraction. And also the repast was going to be at their house after they buried their son tomorrow. And as she was dusting the mantle, she knocked something to the ground. And John looked at his wife, and he could see her mind working as she stared at that paw. And he got up, reaching for her to try to stop her, but she was faster. She bent down, she clutched it to her chest, she closed her eyes and said, "I wish him alive. I wish my son back." She looked around for a miracle. Long moments of silence. And then the door. Clara went to run to the door to open it, but John stopped her. "Don't do it, Clara. Do not open that door. That is not our son out there." "Let me go, John. Let me go. He's out there." "You don't understand, Clara. You didn't see him. I saw him. His body was mangled. There is no way that is our son." "Don't open the door." "Let me go to him. He's back." "Clara, you listen to me. You use your last wish. You wish him dead. and I'll use my 3 and I'll make this right. Make this right! How can you make this right? Stop being hysterical. You wish him dead. I wish him dead. I wish my husband dead. And then she threw the paw on the fire. And as John lunged for the paw, lunged to pull it out of the fire, his knees buckled and he fell to the ground. And as darkness closed around him, the last thing he saw was Clara opening the front door.
Are we all good and creeped out now? Yeah, I am. I'm gonna finish this up with one more. Everybody up for one more story?
One more.
He heard it first when he was out for his evening stroll. It was just the barest whisper coming out of the darkness, as if carried on the wind. I am. After which he wasn't even sure what he'd heard. It could have been anything, really. Probably just a snippet of someone else's conversation. You know, people were always carrying on within earshot of strangers. Yes, that was it. Certainly. Never mind that he was alone on the street. It was nothing. Nothing. He told himself that again and again for the next few days as he went about his daily life. Arriving at the courthouse at 8 a.m. sharp, donning his robes, entering the courtroom, all rise for the honorable. He spent his days handing down sentences, passing judgment for the orderly welfare of his community. It was good work, proper work, and proper that he should do it. It was his place. His father had always said, "There's a thing for every place, a place for everything, my boy." But that nothing, that I am, had been distinctly out of place, which must have been why it returned to his mind again and again, unbidden. And every time it did, he would tell himself, it was nothing. Nothing. But then the nothing happened again. This time in broad daylight, in his garden. His garden was, he was proud to say, a study in orderly perfection. Row upon row of cultivated color. All except for red. He'd never been terribly fond of red. He was just making his morning rounds to remove any stray bits when on the path, between the grandifloras and the floribunds, written in the dirt by a shaky hand, I am. And there was a period at the end. It's a statement then. Not a snippet of some longer conversation as he had thought before. Not I am tired, I am hungry, just I am. Full stop. Declarative. I am what? I am who? Something tickled at the back of his brain. Something he thought perhaps he should remember, but could not quite seem to bring forward. Ah, well, if he couldn't remember it, it was obviously best left forgotten. This I am unpleasantness would be best forgotten too. Scrubbed it out with the toe of his shoe, stamped on it for good measure. There, erased. Erasure was a handy tool when one was in public life. And he was hard-pressed to think of any life more public than that of a small-town judge on the verge of elevation to the state Supreme Court. His father, a small-town judge in his own day, had said, "Reputation, my boy, reputation. We cannot be letting out things for people to talk about. We are the standard bearers of this community." And so, whenever he had inevitably failed to live up to the expected moral standards, driven a little too fast, cheated on a test, that sort of thing, his father would simply erase it. And then, so that he would not have to bear the burden of guilt for his own moral failings, his father had taught him the fine art of forgetting. He would forget this I am business too. And so whenever it came into his mind throughout the course of the day, he would simply prompt himself to forget. And he was so successful that by that evening he was able to get a good night's sleep, having looked over his shoulder only half a dozen times and checked the lock on the front door half a dozen more. And then came Saturday, and with it, the delights of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. His elevation to the state Supreme Court was the headline story, and he had been eagerly awaiting the fruits of the interview he had given the week before. An interview in which he had been both sharp on the points of law and disarmingly witty, if he did say so himself. He collected the paper from the front step and settled into his breakfast nook to read. He just reached the third paragraph when, circled in red by a shaky hand, I am. He scanned the rest of the page. It was circled again and again. Dozens of unavoidable iterations. I am, until his eyes swam with the seeing of it, and he could not unsee it, even after he balled up the paper and threw it in the trash, stood there shaking with fear and rage and indignation. The words remained. He darted outside. The street was empty. Then his neighbor came onto her front porch. "Oh, good morning, Judge. Nice article in the paper." "Thank you. Did you notice anything unusual about it?" "Oh, no. I thought you sounded quite sharp on the points of law and disarmingly witty." "Thank you." He ducked back inside to avoid further conversation, locked the door, closed the blinds, and tried to convince himself that it was nothing. Monday morning, he arrived at the courthouse an unprecedented 18 minutes late. His clerk said, "Oh, good morning, Judge. You all right?" "Yes, why?" "Oh, you just..." He ducked into the restroom. His hair was uncombed. His eyes bloodshot. He had misbuttoned his shirt. "What is wrong with me?" "Order. I must have order." He knew what he would do. He would go into his office, don his robes, enter the courtroom, all rise for the honorable. But when he went into his office, on his desk blotter, the letters 12 inches high, written in the fat, indelible lines of his Mont Blanc pen. I am. "What do you want with me?" He thought suddenly of the last time he had uttered those words. It had been 40 years at least. back in the days when he had been a young man, doing the things that young men sometimes do. It was at that place, in the woods. He ran from the courthouse, drove across town, leapt from his car, barreled down the now almost non-existent path, branches and thorns tearing at his clothing. He stood in that place and remembered. And now that he had remembered, he could not unhear her wholly inappropriate demand that he give his name to the mistake she carried, a mistake she was supposed to have had erased. And now that he had remembered, he could not unsee the red O of her mouth, the unnatural angle of her neck. He and his father had taken such great pains with erasure. They had walked those woods every day for weeks until they were sure that everything was in its place, that there was not a trace, that she was nothing. It could not be. It was impossible. It was nothing. Nothing. He drove home, barricaded himself in his house, and tried, unsuccessfully, to forget. Late in the night, after hours of tossing and turning and punching his pillow, he fell into a dreamless sleep, only to awaken a short time later to a sound that was most definitely out of place. The creak of the stair. The turn of the knob. Then, coming out of the darkness, just the barest whisper, as if carried on the wind. What do you want? Why are you here? Are you here for me? I am. Let's get Judy and Jessica back up here. Thank you all for being Y'all be safe going home. Come back tomorrow. We have storytelling 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. It's going to be another wonderful day. We hope to see you there.
Great job.